Do you use or have access to a Synology NAS? Synology, of course, is a brand that makes a whole bunch of devices in the tech space, specifically NAS devices, network attached storage, dedicated storage devices, a whole bunch of disks that go inside of this device, and it's used for providing file storage out on a network, at home, in a business, wherever. They're awesome. But that's not all that you can actually do with a Synology NAS. Yes, they're great for storing data, right? It's its main purpose. But they also have their own little app store, and you can go and download stuff onto your Synology NAS to give it additional functions. And one of the things that you can do is actually get it running with a server. Actually build a server, multiple servers directly on your NAS. But first, tech fails. A lot of tech does fail, and here is today's one. Samsung is a brand that's been around for a long time, and a number of years ago when Apple did their thing and they released the iPhone, they went and thought, hey, I'm going to go and release a Samsung device. And ever since then, Samsung and Apple have sort of been the leaders when it comes to smart devices, tablets, and all of that sort of stuff. What happened in this tech fail was that Samsung released this device, the Galaxy Note 7. It was released in 2016, and shortly after its release, batteries were exploding. Wow, literally phone batteries, some of them were catching fire, and some were even exploding. Samsung had to do a massive global recall of all their devices, which led to the phone being discontinued entirely. What a fail. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using virtualization software running on the physical hardware, which is the NAS. Essentially, a NAS is like a computer in a way. It's got a CPU, it's got some memory. Now, one small little thing with this, yes, it works, and it works quite well. The more powerful, the better. If you've got a bit of a slower one, you may have a problem. If you've got a faster one, even better. So what you're going to be doing is when you're installing this software and you're building some servers, you need to allocate the server some of these resources. You need to allocate it some RAM, you need to allocate it some CPU space. So the more of that you've got, the more resources you can give to the server, and you're not going to be affecting the performance as much on your NAS, because when you're allocating stuff to your server and your server or servers, if you're going to build more than one, when they're running, the performance of your NAS may actually be affected and may not run as well. Let's now log in to our Synology NAS. I'm going to show you what we're going to do, see how it works. Here I'm on my Synology NAS. I've got a package center where I can just download an application, and I'm going to look for an application that is all about building virtual machines. And of course, this lets me build a whole bunch of VMs directly on my NAS and essentially have my home lab running from my NAS. So I can just go ahead and search for it or check in the package center area right here, and then just install it and then wait. You'll then need to go and configure it depending on what sort of setup you've got on your NAS, what volume, what storage pool, what RAID, whatever else you've got on that NAS, you want to get that set up accordingly. Now, of course, the big thing about this is that you're going to need to have yourself a bunch of ISOs, essentially installation media for all of the different VMs that you're going to be building. So I've got CentOS, which is the version of Linux. I can download Ubuntu, desktop or server, which of course is Linux as well. And I can also go and grab myself a trial version of Windows Server 2022 or any version of Windows Server for that matter. And then those ISOs, you can then go and add them into your VMs that you are going to be building. Opening up the software, you may need to do some initial configuration to make sure that everything works, that you've got your virtual switches, your networking all configured well, and then you're going to go and select the volume that you want to use, where you're going to actually be storing all of these VMs, essentially your home lab servers. Then we'll go and create our first VM. You're going to ask for the flavor, Windows or Linux. Let's go ahead and build a Windows one very, very quickly. This is where I'm going to store it. And how many CPUs, how much RAM do you want to give it? And what is the name of this server? And allocate some specific resources to it. Now, keeping in mind, of course, that this is going to be using the resources of your NAS. So when this VM is running, your NAS resources are going to be now shared with this VM. Now, in the case of Windows, it's going to ask me to go and download some agents, essentially like a driver package, so that Windows recognizes the components of your NAS, essentially the drivers for the hardware, which is your NAS hardware. You then go and navigate to the ISOs that we've gone and downloaded. So we're going to go and get our Windows ISO that we've downloaded and select it right there. Of course, knowing that I've copied these ISOs to my NAS for ease of use. And then we start our VM, and then the installation commences. And now the process of installing Windows Server is pretty straightforward. You just follow the prompts, you let it know where you want to install it, and of course this is going to be installing it in a virtual environment. So you go and format that disk, you wait a bit of time, and then you'll have Windows Server fully running. And then you can do the same thing by creating another VM. This time we're going to use Linux, and we're going to go and point it to our Ubuntu Linux ISO, and then start the installation of that. And then we go and set it up. So go and build yourself as many VMs as you need. Sometimes not good to have all your VMs powered on all at once. Here are a few of my favorites to give you some ideas about what servers, VMs you could actually be building directly on your NAS. Now, the core essential piece that every single business to some extent will have, at least if they've got servers, we'll say, is they're going to be having some sort of a domain setup on what's called a domain controller. So you need to go and build yourself a domain controller. You can install Windows Server 2022 as a VM, and then go and build and promote that server into a domain controller. And then you're essentially going to get Active Directory set up on that domain controller. And then the domain controller essentially becomes the manager for your entire domain. And then of course in Active Directory, go and configure all of the OUs, the organizational units. You can build your users, your computers, security groups, all of that. Little plug for my training course down below. I've got a link to a full course there around Windows Server. I've got links around Windows administration in general, computer network basics, all of that. So go and check that out. All my courses, we go into a lot more detail around AD and domains. So how do computers on a network get their IP address? Like you're plugging in a computer into a network and it automatically just gets a 192.168.0.3 IP address. How does it do that? Well, there's two ways. One is a static IP, somebody physically going in and putting in the IP address. The other way is DHCP. Somebody actually going and setting up a DHCP server, and then it's dishing out IP addresses across your network. So go and build yourself your own DHCP server. A few things that you could do here. You could actually go and actually do this on a Windows server as well. Build your own dedicated Windows box, a VM running DHCP. Again, you can also do this on a Linux box. What if you could run your own email server at home? And the great news is that you can actually do that in your home lab. A lot of companies, most big corporates are going to use some sort of a mail server, something like Exchange. You can get Exchange out on the cloud, right? If you have Microsoft 365, you can actually get an Exchange environment spun up that way. But there's a lot of companies that are using Exchange on-premise, Exchange as an actual server. So you can go and download Microsoft Exchange for free to be able to trial it for 180 days off the Microsoft website. And then you build a VM as an Exchange server. You go and set it up as a mail server and then actually manage emails directly from your own VM. You can sort of split this next one up into two different things, but we're here talking about a firewall and a proxy. A firewall, of course, well, you have a physical firewall potentially sometimes on a router. If you've got a home router, it's probably got some sort of a firewall built into it or a modem. You may have your own separate firewall, a physical appliance, a physical hardware that is running as a firewall. Great, and a lot of companies will do that, but you can also get software-based firewalls. So you can build a server as a firewall. You could also build a proxy. Well, what's a proxy? So essentially a proxy server acts as a bridge between a host server and a client server. Essentially sends data from a website to your computer's IP address, and it passes through this proxy server. So only specific access is allowed. In or out, you could do authentication and things of that nature. One that I love is pfSense. Go and check it out. Download it completely for free, and you can set up a proxy and a firewall. And you know what? This is something that is awesome. If you're wanting to know more about networking, if you want to know more about routes, you want to know about firewall rules, try pfSense. Get it. Wouldn't it be great if you could actually run your own website in your home lab, or at least learn about the technology? And yes, you can by building a web server. One of the most popular CMS, essentially a full platform for websites, is a program called WordPress. You can install WordPress completely for free. It'll install all the backend stuff like PHP, MySQL, like the database and all of that in the background. And understanding a little bit about WordPress is actually going to be one extra little thing that you could have on your CV. And because it is one of the largest web platforms out there, you having those skills will put you a little bit more in high demand. So go and play around with WordPress on a web server. Tied very closely to that would be a smart home server. You know, we're all familiar with your Alexas, with your Siris, with all of these sorts of platforms. Wouldn't it be nice if you could actually get all of your tech talking to your own server and actually centrally managing all of these IoT devices that are just everywhere now? centrally managing them, make sure that they're not going out to the internet, keeps them secure, and you can control things even more. And you could potentially do a lot more by hosting this management internally rather than giving it to the big corporates. Now, with all of these servers running around, you've got all these VMs everywhere now, you want to, of course, make sure that everything is running well, everything is running healthy. A monitoring server, you can actually monitor traffic coming in, traffic coming out, see things going a little bit odd. Like if one of your virtual servers is running a little bit too hot or it's shut down, wouldn't it be nice for you to be alerted when something like that happens? You can actually manage all of this monitoring using lots of different awesome platforms. A few that I love, you can try them for free as well, PRTG and Zabbix. Set them up in your environment so you can actually get a good snapshot on what's going on in your home lab. Now, how do you make sure that all of these servers, all of these applications are up to date? So if you're running Windows Server or Windows 11 in your home, you need to patch these. Microsoft, they release updates for good reasons. They want you to make sure that you're secure. So go and try WSUS completely for free. You can install it as part of your Windows Server, and then you can get all the computers that are of a specific flavor of Windows, for example, to talk into your WSUS server to then centrally manage it. If you want to patch servers of other operating systems, if you want to patch applications, there's a whole range of other patching apps that you can get set up on this patching server to centrally manage all of it. And it just makes it so much easier. Rather than you having to go in server by server and manually update things, you could go and centrally manage it, and you can get a health check on whether your things are up to date. Well, something that is really helpful is to actually have like a jump box or a jump server, like a remote access server, a server that almost acts as the entry point into your network. The last thing that you want to be doing is exposing your home lab and all of these beautiful servers that you've been building out to the internet. Don't do it. A lot of people do that. But what you could do is you could set up a dedicated jump box, almost like a hop into your network, but then that is completely isolated from everything else. It could be behind a DMZ firewall. It could be set up in this completely isolated environment. And then that acts as the next hop for you to then get access to a few more things. But you sort of need to go through this secure jump box before you can get anything else. Do you want to know more about the Synology NAS? Do you want to become an expert at the Synology NAS? Down below in the description notes of this video, there's a link to my Udemy course. You need to go check that out. We talk about a lot of things tech on this channel. Stay tuned and we'll see you on the next video.